Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and today we are getting into something really fascinating. I was actually looking at my Steam library the other day, just kind of scrolling through the backlog.
Oh, we all have that backlog we swear we'll get
Well,
to.
and it struck me that it's mostly just, escapism. I've
Mhm.
got games where I'm slaying dragons, building massive space colonies, racing cars at 200 miles an hour. It is the ultimate tune out the world activity.
And honestly, that is the default mode for sure. We play to disconnect, to turn the brain off, or at least turn it on to something that just doesn't matter in the real world.
Exactly. But then I started reading the source material we have for today's deep dive, and it completely flipped that script. It suggests that if you tweak the architecture of a game just right, it stops being an escape and it starts being a solution.
A functional tool.
Yeah, a way to fix a broken corporate culture, or teach a surgeon how to use a scalpel, or even gather data on how a patient's brain is recovering from a stroke.
Which means we are firmly entering the domain of serious games. And I want to be really clear right off the bat for everyone listening. We are not talking about edutainment.
Oh, please no, not the cheap math games from grade school.
Right, those were famously neither educational nor entertaining. We're talking about high-level, sophisticated systems designed with a very specific utility in mind. And the document we're diving into today is essentially the blueprint for how to build those.
It's the Guide to Designing a Serious Game Design Document, or SGDD, by Julian Alvarez, published really recently, actually, February 2025.
Yes. And what makes this guide so vital is that it isn't just a technical manual for coders. It's more like a psychological and architectural framework.
Because it's trying to solve a really hard problem, right?
Yeah.
How do you make something functional without sucking all the fun out of it?
That is the core conflict. It is a massive tightrope walk. Lean too far into the serious side, and you have a boring training simulator that your employees are going to dread.
But if you lean too far into the game side,
Nobody learns anything. They just have fun and miss the point completely. Alvarez's guide is specifically designed to prevent you from building a structure that collapses the moment a player steps inside.
so our mission today is to decode that blueprint for you. We're going to look at how you actually plan a game that has a job to do, from the business model, which is surprisingly complex, all the way to the legal minefields of modding other people's games.
And we will see why the most dangerous part of game design isn't actually the code, but what Alvarez calls the interpretative gap.
I really love that term. We will definitely get to that. But let's start right at the foundation. The guide opens with something that feels very ungame-like. The business model canvas.
It does seem dry, doesn't it? Starting a creative project with a business model. But you have to think of it as the reality check. Before you write a single line of dialogue or sketch a character, you have to answer the question, is this viable?
Right.
The guide explicitly uses the business model canvas, or BMC, to visualize the economic sanity of the project.
But here is the cool part, I think. The guide totally redefines the words we usually use. In a normal business, revenue means cash, money in the bank, net profit. But Alvarez argues that in a series game, revenue is a much slipperier concept.
It really is. Because if you are building a game to help stroke victims recover motor skills, your revenue isn't game sales.
It's health.
Exactly. It's the quantifiable improvement in patient outcomes. Or, say you are a corporation, your revenue might be data. You are collecting behavioral data on how your managers handle crisis situations under pressure.
That's a massive shift in mindset. You aren't profiting by selling copies on an app store. You are profiting because your employees stopped making a specific safety error that was costing you millions of dollars a year.
Precisely. And that leads directly to what the guide calls the value proposition. You have to define what utility you are actually providing. And Alvarez is very strict here. He says you absolutely must check the state of the art.
Which is really just a fancy way of saying, Google it before you build it.
Honestly, yes. It sounds obvious, but you would be shocked at how many organizations spend six figures developing a custom fire safety simulation only to realize a better, cheaper, more effective one was released 6 months ago.
Ouch.
Yeah. The guide insists on verifying that an equivalent tool doesn't already exist.
There's also a section in the business model regarding partners and costs that I think every single creative person listening needs to hear. It warns about something called masked time.
Yes. The silent budget killer.
I felt personally attacked by this part. Masked time is that invisible cost. It's the nights and weekends you spend tweaking a level because you're a perfectionist. Or that quick call with a subject matter expert that turns into a 4-hour debate about physics.
And the guide warns that if you don't account for this, if you treat that time as free, just because you are passionate about the project, Your business model is fundamentally broken. It's not sustainable at all.
You're just lying to yourself about what the game costs.
Right. You also need to list your strategic partners. In a serious game, you are rarely working alone. If you are making a game about chemical engineering, you need a chemical engineer. You simply cannot fake the serious part.
You can't just wing the chemistry.
No, because if the science is wrong, the game is worse than useless. It's actively harmful.
Okay, so we have the business plan. We know who we're building it for. We know what profit looks like, whether that's money, health, or data. And we haven't bankrupted ourselves with masked time. Now we get to the actual architecture.
The design document itself.
Right, the SGDD. The guide breaks it down into 5 pillars.
And these 5 pillars are the skeleton of the project. If one is missing, the creature simply won't walk.
Let's walk through them because this is where all those abstract ideas turn into actual mechanics. Pillar 1 is title and overview. This seems pretty standard at first glance. Genre, target audience.
It is standard, but with one major addition: the pedagogical objectives. This is your North Star.
Because you aren't just saving a princess anymore.
Yes, exactly. In a normal game, the objective is kill the aliens or save the kingdom. In a serious game, the objective is learn to identify phishing emails or master the steps of CPR. If you don't define that clearly right at the start, the rest of the game will drift off course.
Then we hit pillar 2, gameplay and mechanics. And this is where I think a lot of these projects actually fail. This is where the rubber meets the road.
It is by far the hardest part to design. You have to create rules and constraints that are genuinely fun, but that strictly serve the utility. The guide lists 3 main types of utility to keep in mind: broadcasting a message, dispensing training, or collecting data.
So if I am building a game to teach negotiation skills to sales reps, I can't just give the player a laser gun and let them shoot their way out of a hostile boardroom.
No, you definitely cannot. That would be what we call ludonarrative dissonance. It's when the gameplay contradicts the story or the lesson. If the goal is negotiation, the mechanics must be dialogue trees, emotional reading, resource trading. What the player actually does with their hands and their controller must reinforce what they are supposed to learn with their brain.
It reminds me of those old driving simulators we had in driver's ed. The mechanic wasn't drive fast and do drifts. The mechanic was check your mirrors and signal correctly. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but the mechanic matched the goal perfectly.
And ideally today, we want it to be a little more fun than 1990s driver's ed. But yes, the fundamental principle holds true.
That leads us to pillar 3, universe and characters. The guide calls this the graphic and sound Bible. Now, why is this so important for a training tool? Can't it just be, I don't know, text on a screen?
Not if you want engagement. Even if you are teaching tax law, the universe matters immensely. Are you in a gritty noir detective universe where tax fraud is a mob crime? Are you in a sci-fi universe where you're auditing aliens?
Okay, I would play the Alien Tax Auditor game.
See, it works. The guide emphasizes that you need to describe the history, the tone, the characters in detail. If the universe feels flat or cheap, the learner checks out. They start treating it like a chore, not a game.
Pillar 4 is levels and evaluation, and this introduces a concept that I know game designers absolutely obsess over, the flow state.
Zone, being fully immersed in the challenge.
Right. The guide talks a lot about balancing. You have to keep the player in that sweet spot, right between boredom and frustration.
And for a serious game, that balance is incredibly precarious. Think about it. In a normal game, you are just learning the controls of the rules of the world. In a serious game, you are learning the controls, plus you are trying to memorize the periodic table or learn complex corporate compliance rules.
The cognitive load is essentially doubled.
Yes, so if the game is too hard, they get frustrated and quit. If it's too easy, they get bored and they don't learn anything. The guide strongly suggests regular playtests to iterate on this balance.
And crucially, it mentions the debriefing or summary system here, right?
Very crucial. In a game like Call of Duty, the reward is seeing your high score or unlocking a new skin. In a serious game, the system needs to tell you, okay, you won the level, but you made 3 critical errors in your diagnosis.
The feedback loop has to be educational, not just celebratory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Pillar 5, interface and systems. This covers controls, help menus, visual layouts, and the guide notes this applies to everything. Digital video games, board games, card games, you name it.
Because an interface isn't just a screen. If you're making a serious board game, the interface is the dice, the tokens, the rule book.
Right. The governing principle here is clarity. If the player is fighting the interface, they aren't learning the lesson. You never want the player struggling to figure out how to open the menu when they should be struggling to solve the actual puzzle.
Makes total sense. So we've built the thing. It has a business plan. It has the 5 pillars. But how do we know if it's actually any good? I mean, I've played educational games that looked amazing on paper, but were painfully boring to actually sit down and play.
That brings us to section 3 of the guide, which is quality control. Alvarez talks about enriching the SGDD using evaluation grids. He cites work by Alvarez and Maffiolo here. It's basically a rigorous checklist to keep you honest.
What are the big red flags on that checklist that we should be looking out for?
First is scenario and rules. Are they actually clear? But more importantly, the grid looks at ergonomics and accessibility. And this is becoming a non-negotiable standard, especially in corporate or government settings.
Right. Accessibility is huge now.
It has to be. If you build a training game that can't be used by someone with color blindness or someone with motor impairments, you have failed. You've created a tool that actively excludes a portion of your workforce or your audience. It's not just about legal compliance. It's about fundamental usability.
And then there's the whole aesthetics versus playability debate.
Yes, the grid asks, does the design serve the gameplay or is it just pretty? And ultimately, is it fluid? Is it amusing?
Because if it isn't fun,
The guide is very clear. If it isn't amusing, it's not a game. It's just a gamified textbook. And absolutely nobody wants to play a textbook.
Okay, so that's the path if you are building a game entirely from scratch. But this is where the guide takes a turn that I found really, really fascinating. It asks, what if you don't want to build a game? What if you want to use a game that already exists out in the world?
This is a critical distinction in the industry. The difference between serious games and serious gaming.
Break that down for us, because they sound like the exact same thing.
They do, but the difference is all about origin. A serious game is a product created from the ground up for a utility purpose. Serious gaming is a usage. It's taking an existing entertainment game like Minecraft or Civilization or SimCity and repurposing it for a serious objective.
The guide calls this serious diverting, and it uses a specific example that I absolutely love. It mentions using the video game Overcooked to teach management skills.
It is such a brilliant example of this concept.
For anyone listening who hasn't played Overcooked, can you just describe the sheer chaos of this game?
It is pure stress. You and a team of friends are chefs in a kitchen. But the kitchen is on a pirate ship that is swaying back and forth, sliding all your counters around. Or it's split between 2 moving trucks on a highway. You have to chop vegetables, cook meat, assemble burgers, and wash dishes.
All on a strict time limit. I have almost lost actual friendships over Overcooked. There is just so much screaming, where is the tomato? Who is washing the plates? Why is the soup on fire?
And that is exactly why it works so well for training. It simulates high-pressure communication, task delegation, and crisis management perfectly. You don't need to spend $1 million building a custom crisis simulator when Overcooked costs $20.
So in this case, you aren't writing any code. You aren't building a virtual kitchen. What are you actually documenting?
If you take this route, the guide says you don't write an SGD. Instead, you write an SBDD, Serious Play Design Document.
Serious play design document. Okay.
Yes, because you are designing the scenario of use. You're planning the briefing. You say, okay, team, today we are focusing on clear communication.
Yeah.
Then you run the play session. We will play level 3 too. And then, crucially, you plan the debriefing.
Like, why did we fail? Who stopped communicating?
Exactly. How did you handle the bottleneck at the dishwashing station?
Sure.
You are designing the lesson plan around the existing game.
That seems so much smarter and cost-effective for a lot of companies. But there's another option the guide mentions, serious modding. This is where you actually tinker with the game itself, right?
Yes. Serious modding implies getting under the hood, modifying the code, the graphics, or the text of an existing game to adapt it to your needs. For example, taking a game like Civilization and rewriting the text descriptions to teach actual rigorous historical facts instead of the simplified game version.
The pro here is obvious. You get a working physics engine and beautiful graphics basically for free. But the con?
The con is that you are walking straight into a legal minefield.
Yeah, this is section 5 of our deep dive today. The guide has a whole section titled Legal and Ethical Considerations, and it is pretty stern.
It has to be stern. The golden rule here is authorization. The guide explicitly states, no response does not signify tacit consent.
That is such a crucial line. Just because you emailed the developer of Civilization and they didn't write back saying no, doesn't mean you can just go ahead and mod their game for your corporate training program.
Exactly right. Intellectual property rights are strict. You must respect the authors and the licenses. A lot of people have this misconception. They think, oh, it's for education, so it's fair use, it's allowed.
But it's not.
It is not always true, especially if you're a corporation using it for internal training. You're technically using someone else's commercial product for a commercial purpose.
So what is the ideal path if you really want to mod a game?
Collaboration. The guide suggests contacting the original studios to work directly with them. And we've seen this happen successfully in the real world. Minecraft Education Edition is a massive example of this.
Oh, sure.
Or Assassin's Creed. They released a Discovery Tour mode that removes all the combat and the story and just lets you walk around ancient Egypt or Greece to learn history. That happened because educators asked for it and the studio collaborated.
So the lesson is don't go rogue. Ask for permission.
Always. Or you risk a cease and desist letter that shuts your entire project down overnight.
All right, we're coming into the final stretch here. We've built the game or we've modded one, we've checked the legal boxes, but there's one final massive variable that the guide warns us about in the conclusion. And it's the one thing you can't fully control, the human element.
The interpretive gap. This is a truly fascinating concept in game design.
It sounds super philosophical. What does it actually mean in practice?
It is the gap between what the designer intended to teach and what the player actually learned. Because just because you designed a mechanic to teach empathy doesn't mean the player interprets it that way at all.
Can you give us an example of how that happens?
Sure. Imagine a game designed to teach the real-world hardships of poverty. You give the player very limited resources, tough choices to make. The intent is for the player to feel the stress and the systemic unfairness of poverty.
Right, you want them to feel the struggle.
But a gamer might just look at those mechanics and find a loophole. They might exploit the system, figure out a mathematical trick to win the game, and become rich, totally bypassing the lesson about structural inequality.
They gamed the system. They treated it like a puzzle to be solved rather than an emotional experience to be felt.
Exactly. Because game design is inherently subjective. Players bring their own cultural background, their own biases, and their own gaming habits to the table. If you just hand someone a game and walk away, the educational value is totally unguaranteed.
They might learn the wrong lesson entirely. Like, poverty is easy to escape if you just exploit this one bug in the economy.
Exactly. So to close that gap, the guide strongly recommends ludopedagogical sessions.
Okay, that is a $5 word if I ever heard one. Ludopedagogical.
It is a mouthful, but it basically means guided play. You need a human in the loop, a facilitator, a teacher, or a trainer who frames the entire experience. They prep the players before they start, and most importantly, they debrief them afterwards. They ask, what did you feel when you ran out of money? Why did you make that specific choice?
So the actual learning doesn't happen during the game. It happens about the game.
Precisely. The game provides the raw experience. The debriefing provides the actual knowledge.
But what if you can't have a teacher there? What if this is a mobile training game played by 10,000 remote employees at home? You can't possibly have a Zoom call for every single one of them.
In that case, the guide suggests automated debriefings. You have to essentially build that teacher into the software. Maybe after a level, a video pops up explaining the real-world context of what just happened. Or a chatbot asks the player a few reflection questions. You cannot just leave them alone with the mechanics. You have to guide their reflection.
It's like the game has to become self-aware of its own lesson.
In a way, yes. And finally, the guide leaves us with this really important thought. The SGDD is a living document.
So it's not set in stone once you start coding.
Never. It evolves throughout development based on all those playtests we talked about. If the playtesters are finding loopholes, or if they aren't understanding the UI, you have to change the design. The document changes as the project grows.
So let's bring this all together for everyone listening. We started with the business model canvas, realizing that in this serious world, revenue can actually mean health or behavioral data.
We walked through the 5 pillars, establishing that mechanics must serve the pedagogy, not just the fun. We talked about how the universe sets the tone and how the interface must be invisible to the user.
We looked at the quality control checklists, noting why accessibility is absolutely not optional. And we explored the alternative route of serious gaming, using a game like Overcooked via an SGDD instead of building a simulator from scratch.
We navigated the legal minefield of modding, and finally, we faced the interpretive gap. The realization that a game without a debriefing is often just a toy.
It really highlights that a serious game requires serious documentation. It's not just, hey, let's make learning fun. It's a rigorous discipline of engineering behavior through play.
It truly is. It's about respecting the player's time and intelligence.
Hmm.
If you were going to ask someone to spend 2 hours in your simulation, you owe it to them to ensure they walk away with something tangibly valuable.
The guide's mention of using Overcook for management training really stuck with me. It makes you look at your game library entirely differently.
It really does. It raises a very important question. What other popular entertainment games are currently hiding profound training simulations?
Right. Is Tetris actually the ultimate supply chain and inventory management simulator? Is Among Us actually a masterclass in deception detection and social engineering?
I would argue yes, absolutely. Among Us teaches you how to spot inconsistencies in a story better than any corporate compliance video I have ever been forced to watch. They are just waiting for the right serious play design document to unleash that potential.
A challenge for our listeners, perhaps. Next time you pick up a controller to just escape for a while, ask yourself, what am I really practicing right now? And could I write a design document to teach this exact skill to someone else?
That is a genuinely fascinating thought exercise.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the blueprint of serious play. Keep playing and keep learning.
Goodbye, everyone.
Catch you next time.